What happens when a child soldier who survived the deadliest war in galactic history tries to fit in at an ordinary human high school? When 17-year-old Kira Thorne walks through the doors of Jefferson High on her first day, she carries scars that most adults twice her age have never seen. She's fought alongside veteran Marines against alien killing machines, watched entire planets burn, and made decisions that saved thousands of lives. But none of that prepared her for teenage cruelty, social hierarchies, and the unique brutality of high school bullying. The galaxy knows humans as the fiercest warriors in known space, the species that turned the tide in the Convergence War and saved every civilized world from extinction. But Kira is about to discover that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on distant battlefields against alien invaders. Sometimes they're fought in cafeterias, hallways, and classrooms, where the weapons are words and the wounds cut deeper than plasma burns. This is the story of what happens when humanity's greatest warrior tries to become just another student, and how a girl who faced down the universe's most terrifying enemies must now face something far more challenging, being a normal teenager. Because while the galaxy may fear human military might, Kira is about to show them something even more powerful, the unbreakable spirit of a human who refuses to be broken no matter how dark things get. Kira Thorne stood at the edge of the school parking lot, watching hundreds of teenagers pour through the glass doors of Jefferson High School like water through a broken dam. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the straps of her worn military surplus backpack. 3 years ago, she had been crouched in the ruins of New Geneva, watching convergence drones sweep across the skyline with their death rays painting the clouds red. Today, she was 17 and starting her junior year at a civilian school for the first time in her life. The morning sun felt wrong on her face, too peaceful. Too normal. Kira's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation as students rushed past her. Complaints about summer reading assignments, excitement over new relationships, worries about college applications. None of them knew that the quiet girl standing by the flagpole had spent the last 4 years helping to save their civilization. A group of girls walked by, their laughter bright and carefree. One of them glanced at Kira's scarred hands and military-style clothing, whispering something to her friends that made them all look back with expressions somewhere between curiosity and disgust. Kira's jaw tightened. She had faced down convergence hunters without flinching, but the casual cruelty in those teenage eyes made her stomach clench. The Convergence War had ended 8 months ago when the last alien stronghold fell to a combined human fleet. Kira had been there, coordinating ground forces from a command bunker while 14-year-old human soldiers fought alongside grizzled veterans. She had made decisions that saved entire colonies and watched friends die in ways that would haunt her forever. But the galaxy was safe now. Humanity had proven itself the fiercest warrior species in known space, and traumatized child soldiers like Kira were being reintegrated into normal society. Normal. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "Excuse me, are you Kira Thorne?" A woman in her 50s approached, wearing the kind of bright smile that adults reserved for children they thought might be dangerous. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, your guidance counselor. We spoke on the phone." "Yes, ma'am." Kira's posture automatically straightened into military attention, drawing more stares from passing students. Mrs. Patterson's smile flickered. "Please, just relax. You're among friends here. Let's get you oriented, shall we?" As they walked through the crowded hallway, Kira's enhanced senses went into overdrive. Her genetic modifications designed to make her a more effective soldier picked up every heartbeat, every breath, every whispered comment about the weird new girl. The hallways felt like urban combat zones. Too many sight lines, too many potential threats, nowhere to establish proper defensive positions. "Your academic records are quite impressive," Mrs. Patterson was saying as they navigated through clusters of students. "Advanced mathematics, tactical analysis, xenobiology, 3 alien languages, though I notice you're missing some traditional subjects like literature and social studies." "We focused on combat-relevant education," Kira replied quietly. "Literature wasn't considered essential when the enemy was trying to sterilize our planets." An awkward silence fell between them. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "Well, you'll find our environment much more well-rounded. Here's your locker combination, and this is your class schedule. Your first period is Advanced Chemistry with Mr. Rodriguez. The chemistry classroom felt impossibly small after years of operation centers and military barracks. Kira chose a seat in the back corner. Always keep your back to a wall, always maintain sight lines to all exits, and waited as other students filtered in. The teacher, an enthusiastic man in his 30s, began explaining molecular bonding while Kira found herself automatically calculating how the various chemicals could be weaponized. "Hey," the whisper came from her right. A boy with carefully styled hair and expensive clothes was leaning toward her. "You're the war girl, right? The one who killed aliens?" Kira met his gaze steadily. "I served in the Convergence War." "That's so cool. Did you really see them up close? The hunters, I mean?" "My dad says they were like 10 feet tall with acid for blood." "Convergence hunters average 8.5 feet in height," Kira said quietly. "Their blood is actually a corrosive enzyme that breaks down organic matter, and they smell like rotting metal." The boy's eyes widened with excitement, but before he could ask more questions, Mr. Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Mr. Ted Stevens, Miss Thorne, perhaps you could share your conversation with the rest of us." Heat flooded Kira's cheeks as every head in the classroom turned toward her. In the war, she had briefed generals and coordinated with alien allies without breaking a sweat, but the collective stare of 30 teenagers made her want to disappear. "We were just discussing the practical applications of chemistry," she said carefully. Mr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what practical applications were those?" Kira's mind raced. She couldn't exactly explain that she had been thinking about improvised explosives and chemical weapons. Molecular analysis for identifying unknown substances in hostile environments. A few students laughed, and one girl in the front row rolled her eyes. "God, does everything have to be about the war with her?" The comment hit Kira like a physical blow. She had spent 4 years fighting for their right to exist, watching friends die to keep Earth and her colonies safe, and now she was being mocked for it. Her hands clenched into fists under the desk as her enhanced adrenal system flooded her bloodstream with combat stimulants. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Kira forced herself to take notes and participate when called upon, but her mind kept drifting to memories of plasma fire and screaming aliens. When the bell rang, she was the first one out the door. Her second period was English literature, a subject she had never formally studied. The teacher, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, was discussing symbolism in classical poetry when she noticed Kira's blank expression. "Miss Thorne, what do you think the author meant when she wrote about the darkness that lives in men's hearts?" Kira thought about the Convergent soldiers she had killed, not the alien monsters, but the human collaborators who had sold out their own species for promises of power. She thought about the darkness she had seen in the eyes of child soldiers who had lost too much too young. "I think darkness isn't something that lives in hearts," she said slowly. "I think it's something that gets put there by experience, and once it's there, it changes everything you see." The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "That's a very mature observation, dear," but Kira could see the looks on her classmates' faces, some pitying, some fearful, most just uncomfortable. She was different from them in ways that couldn't be hidden or fixed. The war had marked her inside and out, and these kids could sense it even if they didn't understand it. Lunch was the worst part. Kira sat alone at a table in the corner, methodically eating a sandwich while observing the complex social dynamics playing out around her. She could identify the various cliques and hierarchies with the same analytical skills she had once used to map enemy troop movements. The popular kids held the central tables like a strategic strong point. The athletes formed mobile patrols, moving between groups to maintain their social territory. The outsiders and misfits clustered at the edges like refugees in their own homeland. A paper airplane suddenly struck her in the head. She looked up to see a table of boys laughing, one of them miming throwing motions. The leader, a tall kid with a quarterback's build and a cruel smile, stood up and walked over. "Hey, war hero?" he said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "My dad says you people are all messed up in the head. Says the government shouldn't let psycho kids into normal schools." Kira's enhanced reflexes could have put him on the floor in half a second. Her military training had taught her 17 different ways to incapacitate an opponent without permanent injury. Instead, she forced herself to sit perfectly still. "Your dad might be right," she said quietly. The boy seemed taken aback by her calm response. He had clearly expected fear or anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've seen things that would give your dad nightmares for the rest of his life. It means I've made decisions that most adults couldn't handle. And it means I'm trying very hard to be normal. But normal might not be possible for someone like me." She stood up slowly, her movements precise and controlled. Even though the boy was bigger than her, something in her posture made him take an involuntary step backward. "But just because I'm messed up doesn't mean I'm broken. And it definitely doesn't mean you can treat me like garbage." The cafeteria had gone quiet around them. Kira picked up her backpack and walked away, leaving the boy standing there looking confused and slightly frightened. As she passed other tables, she heard whispers following her: "Psycho," "dangerous," "shouldn't be here." The afternoon classes blurred together. History, where she knew more about recent galactic events than the textbook. Physical education, where she had to pretend to struggle with exercises that were laughably easy after military conditioning. Art class, where her drawings of abstract landscapes kept turning into battle scenes without her conscious intention. By the time the final bell rang, Kira was emotionally exhausted. She walked slowly toward the parking lot where her guardian, a retired military psychiatrist named Dr. Sarah Chen, would be waiting to pick her up. Other students pushed past her in their rush to get home, to get back to their safe, normal lives. "Kira!" a voice called behind her. She turned to see a girl about her own age with bright purple hair and paint-stained fingers. "I'm Maya. I was in your art class." "I remember." Kira studied the girl's face, looking for signs of mockery or pity. "Look, I know today was probably pretty rough," Maya said, falling into step beside her. "This place can be brutal, even for normal kids. But not everyone here is an ass like Brad Morrison. The boy from lunch. Yeah, his dad's some big-wig politician who speaks out against veteran funding. Asshole doesn't fall far from the tree, you know." Maya glanced at Kira sideways. "For what it's worth, I thought what you said to him was pretty badass." Kira felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. "Thank you. Want to sit with me at lunch tomorrow? I usually hang out with the art kids and theater nerds. We're weird, but we're good weird, not cool weird." Before Kira could answer, a familiar voice called her name. Dr. Chen was standing beside a modest sedan, her expression concerned. "How was your first day?" "Challenging," Kira said honestly. She turned back to Maya. "I'd like that. Sitting with you, I mean." Maya grinned. "Cool. See you tomorrow, war girl." As Dr. Chen's car pulled away from the school, Kira watched the building shrink in the rear window. "They think I'm dangerous," she said quietly. "Are you?" Chen asked, not unkindly. She thought about the combat modifications in her DNA, the classified training in her muscle memory, the calculated violence she was capable of. Yes, but not to them. Never to innocent people. "That's what makes you different from the kind of dangerous they're afraid of," Dr. Chen said. "You have control. You have purpose. You have humanity." "Then why do I feel so lost?" Chen was quiet for a moment as they stopped at a red light. "Because you're trying to figure out who you are when you're not at war. That's something every veteran struggles with, but it's especially hard when you've never had a chance to be a normal kid." That night, Kira lay in her bed staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. Tomorrow she would go back to Jefferson High and face another day of stares, whispers, and casual cruelty. Tomorrow she would continue trying to fit into a world that seemed determined to reject her. But for the first time since arriving on Earth, she didn't feel completely alone. Maya's offer of friendship had been small, but it was real. And Dr. Chen was right. She did have control, purpose, and humanity. The war had tried to strip those things away from her, but she had held on to them through 4 years of hell. High school bullies, she decided, would not be what finally broke her. As sleep finally claimed her, Kira's dreams were filled not with plasma fire and screaming aliens, but with the sound of teenagers laughing in a school cafeteria. For once, in the dream, she was laughing with them. The second week at Jefferson High brought new challenges that Kira hadn't anticipated. Word had spread about her military background, and she found herself divided into two camps of unwanted attention, those who treated her like a dangerous animal and those who saw her as a celebrity. Both reactions made her skin crawl. Brad Morrison and his crew had escalated from paper airplanes to more sophisticated harassment. They would accidentally bump into her in the hallways hard enough to send her books flying. They made loud comments about killer kids whenever she passed. Worst of all, they had started following her home, keeping just enough distance to avoid being accused of stalking while making sure she knew they were there. Maya's friendship had proven genuine, though. The purple-haired girl had introduced Kira to her small circle of artistic misfits, and for an hour each day at lunch, Kira could almost pretend to be normal. Almost. "You're holding back in PE," observed Jake, a quiet boy who painted hyper-realistic portraits of imaginary aliens. He was sitting across from Kira in the art room during their shared study hall, carefully adding details to a canvas.
"I saw you running the mile yesterday."
"You were barely breathing hard, but you kept yourself in the middle of the pack." Kira paused in her own sketch, another landscape that was slowly transforming into a battlefield despite her efforts. "I don't want to stand out more than I already do." "But you're miserable trying to be average," Maya pointed out from where she was working on a sculpture that looked like it was screaming, "I mean, look at your art. Every single thing you draw turns into a war scene. Your subconscious is trying to tell you something. That I'm damaged," Kira asked bitterly. "That you're trying to process trauma through creativity," said a new voice. They all turned to see Ms. Rodriguez, the art teacher, approaching their table. She was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and paint permanently embedded under her fingernails. "I've been watching your work, Kira. You have talent, but more importantly, you have something to say." Kira looked down at her sketch, really seeing it for the first time. What had started as rolling hills had become trenches. Innocent clouds had transformed into smoke from burning cities. A peaceful stream was now a river running red with alien blood. "This is what I see when I try to imagine beauty," she said quietly. "This is what 4 years of war did to my brain." Miss Rodriguez pulled up a chair. "May I tell you about my grandfather?" Kira nodded. "He fought in World War III, back when humans were only fighting each other. When he came home, he couldn't sleep in beds anymore, only on the floor with his back to a wall. He couldn't enjoy fireworks or thunderstorms, and he couldn't draw anything beautiful without it turning into something painful." Miss Rodriguez gestured to Kira's sketch. "But eventually he learned that the pain and the beauty weren't opposites. They were the same thing, viewed from different angles." "I don't understand." "You survived something that would have broken most people. That survival, that strength, that refusal to give up, that's beautiful, Kira. The scars you carry aren't flaws, they're proof of your courage." Before Kira could respond, the door to the art room burst open. Brad Morrison stood there with 3 of his friends, all of them wearing the kind of predatory grins that meant trouble. "Well, well," Brad said, sauntering into the room like he owned it. "If it isn't the Killer Kids therapy session." Miss Rodriguez stood immediately. "Mr. Morrison, you're supposed to be in study hall." "Bathroom pass," he said, waving a slip of paper. "Just thought I'd check on our resident psychopath. Make sure she's not drawing plans to blow up the school." Kira's hands stilled on her sketch. Around the table, her friends tensed. Maya's jaw was set in anger, while Jake looked ready to bolt. But Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward, putting herself between Brad and Kira. "That's enough. All of you, out of my classroom. Now, relax, teach. We're just being friendly." Brad's eyes never left Kira's face. "Tell me, war hero, how many people did you kill?" "I heard it was hundreds. My dad says they gave medals to kids for murder." Something cold and dangerous flickered in Kira's chest. Her enhanced reflexes were calculating angles, distances, weak points. It would be so easy to show this ignorant boy what real violence looked like. Instead, she forced herself to speak calmly. I killed enemy combatants who were trying to exterminate the human race. I saved civilian populations from genocide. And if your father has a problem with that, maybe he should have volunteered to go fight them himself instead of sending children to do it. Brad's face reddened. You're just a murderer with a fancy excuse. Everyone knows it. That's why nobody wants you here. Out. Ms. Rodriguez's voice had gone ice cold. All 4 of you, out of my classroom immediately, or I'm calling security. For a moment, it looked like Brad might push further, but something in Miss Rodriguez's stance made him reconsider. Whatever. Come on, guys. Let's leave the freaks to their finger painting. As they left, one of Brad's friends knocked over Maya's sculpture, sending hours of work crashing to the floor in pieces. Maya cried out in dismay, dropping to her knees to gather the fragments. I can fix it, Kira said quietly, kneeling beside her friend. My hands are steadier than most people's. Military training. It's not about the sculpture, Maya said, tears in her eyes. It's about them thinking they can just destroy things because they feel like it. Ms. Rodriguez was already on her phone calling the main office to report the incident, but Kira knew nothing would come of it. Brad's father was a prominent local politician who donated heavily to the school. Kira was a traumatized veteran that most people wished would just disappear. That afternoon in PE, things came to a head. They were playing basketball and Kira had been carefully moderating her performance to seem average. But when Brad's team took control of the ball, he made a point of targeting her specifically, driving toward her position with obvious aggressive intent. Come on, killer, he taunted as he approached. Show us what you've got. Kira held her ground, playing defense normally. But when Brad suddenly changed direction and rammed his elbow toward her ribs, a move that would have sent a normal teenager to the nurse's office, her training kicked in. Without conscious thought, she deflected his arm, stepped inside his guard, and used his own momentum to send him sprawling across the gymnasium floor. The entire class stopped and stared. Brad lay on his back, winded and shocked. Coach Thompson blew his whistle. Morrison! Thorne! What the hell was that? She attacked me, Brad gasped, struggling to his feet. Did you see what she did? She's dangerous. I saw you throw an elbow at her face, Coach Thompson replied dryly. And I saw her defend herself efficiently, but the damage was done. By the end of the day, rumors had spread throughout the school. Kira had beaten up Brad Morrison. She was dangerous. She was unstable. She didn't belong in a normal school. Walking home that afternoon, Kira found herself alone again. Even Maya had seemed nervous after witnessing her quick takedown of Brad. Dr. Chen was working late, so Kira was walking the 2 miles to her apartment complex. She was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw 5 figures following her. Brad and his usual 3 friends, plus 2 older boys she didn't recognize. They spread out across the sidewalk, cutting off her retreat. Thought you were pretty tough in gym class, Brad called out, his voice echoing off the empty street. Let's see how tough you are when it's fair. Kira assessed the situation with military precision. 5 opponents, all larger than her. No weapons visible, but they could be concealed. No witnesses. Multiple escape routes, but they were positioned to cut her off from the most direct ones. This isn't fair, she said calmly. It's 5 against 1. Yeah, but you're not really human anymore, are you? One of the older boys said. My brother was in the war. He told me about you kid soldiers, all hopped up on genetic mods and combat drugs. So 5 against 1 seems about right. They were closing in now, forming a loose circle around her. Kira's enhanced senses picked up elevated heart rates, the smell of adrenaline, the particular tension in muscles that preceded violence. These boys meant to hurt her badly. Last chance to walk away, she said quietly. Brad laughed. You gonna tell the teacher on us? Gonna call your mommy? My mother died when I was 13, Kira said, her voice flat. Convergence plasma bomb. She was evacuating civilians from New Sydney when the dome failed. Something in her tone made them hesitate. For just a moment, the reality of what she had lived through seemed to penetrate their teenage bravado. But Brad rallied quickly. "Good sob story. Too bad nobody cares." He lunged at her, and Kira's world shifted into combat mode. Time seemed to slow as her enhanced reflexes kicked in. Brad's clumsy tackle was telegraphed from miles away. She sidestepped, grabbed his extended arm, and used his momentum to throw him into one of his friends. 2 down. The older boys were faster, more experienced in actual fighting, but they weren't trained soldiers who had fought aliens with acid for blood and reflexes faster than human thought. Kira moved between them like water, redirecting their attacks using their size against them, applying just enough force to disable without causing permanent damage. When it was over, all 5 boys were on the ground groaning and nursing various injuries. Kira stood in the center of them, barely breathing hard, her military training having taken over completely. "I tried to warn you," she said quietly. "I've been holding back since I got here, trying to be normal, trying to fit in. But you wouldn't let me." Brad struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. "You're insane. You're a monster." "No," Kira said, and her voice carried the weight of 4 years of impossible choices. "I'm a soldier. I was trained to protect innocent people from those who would hurt them. The only difference between then and now is that then everyone understood why it was necessary." She picked up her backpack and started walking away. Behind her, the boys were helping each other up, making threats about calling the police, about getting her expelled, about making her pay. "You call the cops," she said without turning around. "Tell them 5 teenage boys ganged up on one girl and got their asses handed to them. See how tough that makes you sound." By the time she reached her apartment, word had already spread. Her phone was buzzing with messages from Maya, from Miss Rodriguez, from Dr. Chen. The school's automated calling system had left a voicemail asking her to come in for a disciplinary meeting first thing in the morning. Kira sat on her bed, staring at her hands. These hands had piloted starfighters, performed field surgery, held dying friends. Now they had been used to hurt human children, even if those children had attacked first. When Dr. Chen arrived an hour later, her face was grim. "I heard what happened. Are you here to tell me I'm being transferred to another school?" Kira asked. "I'm here to ask if you're okay." Dr. Chen sat down beside her on the bed. "5 boys, Kira, they ganged up on you. Are you hurt?" "No." "I'm fine." Kira's voice was hollow. "I hurt them, though. I could have killed them if I wanted to. That's what I was trained for. But you didn't. I wanted to." The admission came out as barely a whisper. "For just a moment, when Brad said nobody cared about my mother, I wanted to show him exactly what I learned in the war." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "But you controlled yourself. You used minimum necessary force. You protected yourself without becoming the monster they accused you of being. Did I? Or did I just prove that they were right all along? Kira, look at me." Dr. Chen's voice was firm. "You are not a monster. You are a 17-year-old girl who survived hell and is trying to build a normal life. What happened today wasn't your fault. Then why do I feel like everything I touch turns to violence? Because you're carrying trauma that no child should have to bear. Because you're trying to fit into a world that doesn't understand what you've been through. And because some people will always be afraid of strength they don't possess." The meeting at school the next morning went about as well as expected. Principal Davies, a nervous man in his 50s, sat across from Kira and Dr. Chen with a thick folder of incident reports. "Miss Thorne, we've had multiple complaints about your behavior. Fighting, inappropriate responses in class, making other students uncomfortable." "She was attacked by 5 students," Dr. Chen interrupted. "She defended herself." "The other boys claim she instigated the fight." "The other boys are lying," Kira said flatly. "Check the security cameras near the gymnasium. Check for witnesses. Or, better yet, ask them to explain how one girl instigated a fight against 5 bigger opponents." Principal Davies shuffled papers uncomfortably. "Regardless of who started what, the fact remains that you seriously injured multiple students. I gave them bruises and strained muscles. If I had wanted to seriously injure them, they would be in the hospital. The principal's face paled at the matter-of-fact way she delivered that statement. "Miss Thorne, I don't think you understand how serious this is." "I understand perfectly." Kira leaned forward in her chair. "You want me gone because I make everyone uncomfortable, because I remind them that the safe little world they live in was bought with the blood of children like me, because it's easier to blame the victim than deal with the bullies." "That's not," Principal Davies started, but Dr. Chen held up a hand. "Let's be honest here," she said. "Are you suspending the 5 boys who attacked Kira? That's a separate disciplinary matter." "That's a no, then." Dr. Chen's voice was cold. "You're punishing the victim while protecting her attackers because their parents have more political influence." The meeting dragged on for another hour, but the outcome was predetermined. Kira was suspended for 3 days for excessive use of force in a confrontation. The 5 boys who had jumped her received no punishment at all. As they left the school, Dr. Kett substituted to bake him. Chen was fuming. "This is unacceptable. I'm going to file a complaint with the district. Maybe contact the media." "Don't." Kira's voice was tired. "It won't help. It'll just make me more of a freak show than I already am. So what do you want to do?" Kira was quiet for a long moment, watching normal teenagers stream through the school doors, heading to their normal classes, living their normal lives. Lives she had fought to preserve but could never share. "I want to figure out who I am when I'm not at war," she said finally. "I want to find a way to be human without being normal." "That's a good goal," Dr. Chen said gently. "But it's going to take time." "I know." Kira managed a small smile. "Good thing I'm patient. You learn that in war zones. Sometimes the only way to win is to outlast your enemies." As they walked away from Jefferson High, Kira felt something settling in her chest. Not peace exactly, but a kind of grim determination. She had survived the worst war in galactic history. She could survive high school, too, even if it meant fighting a different kind of battle every single day. The question was whether she could do it without losing the humanity she had fought so hard to protect. Kira's 3-day suspension became a turning point, though not in the way anyone expected. Instead of hiding away in shame, she spent those days exploring the city, trying to understand the civilian world she had fought to protect. She visited libraries and museums, watched people go about their daily lives, and slowly began to see humanity from a different perspective. On the first day, she found herself at the downtown Veterans Memorial, staring at the newest edition, a black marble wall engraved with the names of those who had died in the Convergence War. Most of the names belonged to adults, career soldiers who had volunteered to face the alien threat, but scattered throughout were names followed by ages that made her stomach clench. 16, 15, 14, even some as young as 12. Rough reading, isn't it? Kira turned to find an older man in a wheelchair approaching. He had graying hair and the kind of scars that spoke of plasma burns. A veteran, she realized, probably from the later battles when human forces had begun pushing the Convergence back. "I knew some of these people," she said quietly. "So did I." The man positioned his wheelchair beside her. "I'm Marcus Webb, 3rd Fleet Marines." "You?" "Kira Thorne. I was various assignments." Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more sharply. "You were one of the kids." It wasn't a question. Kira nodded. "Damn." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I heard about the youth brigades, but I never actually met any of you. Command kept you separate from the regular units. They thought we'd be a bad influence on adult morale," Kira said with bitter humor. "Nothing ruins a Marine's day like watching a 13-year-old make tactical decisions. How are you holding up? I mean, really holding up?" The question was asked with the kind of understanding that only came from shared experience. Kira found herself being more honest than she had been with anyone, even Dr. Chen. "I don't know how to be normal," she admitted. "I'm trying to go to regular high school, but I don't fit. I can't relate to their problems, and they're terrified of mine." Marcus nodded slowly. "You know what I learned after coming back? Normal is overrated. The galaxy needs people who've seen what you've seen, who've done what you've done. The trick is figuring out how to use those experiences to help instead of just surviving them." "What do you mean? You ever think about teaching?" "Training, Passing on what you learn to people who might need it someday? Kira frowned. I'm 17. Who's going to learn anything from me? Kid, you survived 4 years of the worst conflict in galactic history. You've got skills and knowledge that most people can't even imagine. More importantly, you've got perspective. Marcus gestured toward the memorial wall. All these names represent people who died so that others could live normal lives. But normal doesn't mean naive. There's still a dangerous galaxy out there, and humanity needs to be ready. When Kira returned to school on Thursday, she found an unexpected ally waiting for her. Ms. Rodriguez had set up a special project in the art room, a memorial piece for the Convergence War, and she wanted Kira's input on historical accuracy. I've been thinking about what you said, Ms. Rodriguez explained as she showed Kira the preliminary sketches, about beauty and pain being the same thing from different angles. I want to create something that honors what happened without sanitizing it. The project became a refuge. During lunch and study halls, Kira worked with Ms. Rodriguez and a small group of art students to create something that captured both the horror and heroism of the war. For the first time since arriving at Jefferson High, her military experience was being treated as valuable rather than shameful. Maya, who had initially been nervous after witnessing Kira's fighting skills, gradually warmed up to her again. Jake started asking thoughtful questions about alien biology for his paintings. Even some students she had never spoken to began stopping by the art room to see their work. But Brad Morrison and his crew were far from finished. The harassment escalated into psychological warfare. They would leave printouts of articles about traumatized veterans taped to Kira's locker. They started rumors that she had been court-martialed for war crimes. Most cruelly, they began making jokes about dead soldiers whenever she was within earshot. Maybe if your mom had been a better soldier, she'd still be alive, Brad whispered as he passed her in the hallway one day. Kira stopped walking. Every student in the corridor seemed to hold their breath. What did you say? Her voice was dangerously quiet. Brad, emboldened by his friend's presence, repeated the comment louder. I said maybe your mom wouldn't have died if she wasn't such a pathetic soldier. The hallway erupted in shocked gasps. Even Brad's friends looked uncomfortable with how far he had just pushed things. But instead of attacking him, Kira did something unexpected. She laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who had seen too much darkness to be surprised by it anymore. You want to know about my mother? Kira asked, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hallway. Her name was Colonel Sarah Thorne. She was a xenobiologist who helped develop the plasma-resistant armor that saved thousands of lives. When the Convergence broke through the New Sydney defense grid, she could have evacuated with the other command staff. Instead, she stayed behind to coordinate civilian evacuations. Kira started walking toward Brad, who suddenly looked much less confident than he had a moment before. She held position for 6 hours while the dome was failing, directing transport ships and maintaining comm networks. When the final plasma bombardment hit, she was still at her post, making sure the last civilian transport made it out safely. Kira stopped just out of arm's reach of Brad. She saved 12,000 people that day. She died so that children like you could grow up safe enough to be stupid. The hallway was completely silent now. Some students were crying, others were staring at Brad with expressions of disgust and shame. So please, Kira continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, tell me again how pathetic she was. Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. For perhaps the first time in his privileged life, he seemed to understand that he had encountered something bigger and more real than his small, cruel world could contain. I didn't. No, Kira agreed. You didn't. You didn't know because you never bothered to find out. You just decided that making me suffer would be fun. She turned to address the crowd that had gathered. That's what bullying really is. It's not about the victim being weak or different. It's about the bully being too small to understand anything beyond their own little sphere of experience. As she walked away, leaving Brad standing there looking smaller than ever before, scattered applause broke out. Not from everyone. Some students were still clearly uncomfortable with her presence, but from enough people that she felt something shift in the social atmosphere around her. The change wasn't immediate or universal, but it was real. Students who had avoided her began nodding politely in the hallways. Some even stopped to look at the memorial project she was working on. A few brave souls asked genuine questions about the war, approaching the topic with respect rather than morbid curiosity. The breakthrough came during a surprise lockdown drill 2 weeks later. Jefferson High had implemented new security protocols in response to various threats, both terrestrial and potentially extraterrestrial. Most students treated these drills as an excuse to goof off, but when the alarm sounded during lunch period, Kira's enhanced senses detected something wrong. The timing was off. The announcement had come over the PA system in Principal Davies' voice, but his speech pattern was slightly different. Most people wouldn't notice, but Kira had been trained to detect audio manipulation. While other students were lazily moving toward designated safe areas, Kira slipped away from the group and made her way toward the main office. Her military training screamed that this was not a drill. The school's corridors felt wrong as she moved through them. Too quiet, too organized. If this had been a real emergency, there should have been more chaos, more fear. Instead, everything felt staged. She reached the office wing just as she heard the sound of muffled voices from behind the principal's door. Moving with the silent precision that had kept her alive during countless reconnaissance missions, Kira approached the door and listened. Financial records should be enough to discredit him completely, a voice was saying. It wasn't Principal Davies. What about the girl? Another voice asked. The veteran kid. She could be a problem. One traumatized teenager against a coordinated disinformation campaign? Please. By the time we're done, no one will believe anything she says. Kira's enhanced hearing picked up at least 4 distinct voices, none of which belonged to school personnel. Her mind raced through possibilities. Corporate espionage, political conspiracy, or something worse. She was reaching for her phone to call for help when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Spinning around, she found herself face to face with a man in janitor's coveralls who definitely didn't belong at Jefferson High. His stance was all wrong, too alert, too balanced, like a soldier trying to pass as a civilian. Little girls shouldn't be wandering around during lockdown, he said, his hand moving toward what was almost certainly a concealed weapon. Kira's training kicked in. In one fluid motion, she stepped inside his reach, grabbed his wrist, and applied pressure to a nerve cluster that dropped him unconscious before he could make a sound. The movement was so fast and precise that it would have been invisible to normal human perception. But as she lowered the unconscious man to the floor, she heard the office door open behind her. Well, well, said a familiar voice. The famous child soldier. Kira turned to see a woman in an expensive suit, flanked by 3 men who were obviously professional security. Behind them, she could see Principal Davies tied to a chair, very much alive but clearly terrified. Sarah Martinez, the woman introduced herself with mock politeness. I represent certain political interests that would prefer the Convergence War stayed buried in the past. The war ended 8 months ago, Kira said, carefully, her mind racing through tactical options. 4 opponents, weapons likely, civilian hostage, unknown number of additional hostiles throughout the building. The shooting stopped 8 months ago, Martinez corrected. But the political ramifications are still playing out. Veterans asking uncomfortable questions about government decisions, war heroes, like your mother becoming martyrs for inconvenient causes. Kira felt ice form in her stomach. What do you know about my mother? I know she discovered something before she died. Something about the real reason the Convergence attacked human space. Something that certain people would prefer remained classified. Martinez smiled coldly. I also know that her daughter has been asking questions about accessing her mother's personal files. It was true. Kira had been trying for months to get access to her mother's research, hoping to understand her final days. The military had stonewalled her at every turn, claiming everything was classified. So here's what's going to happen, Martinez continued. You're going to stop asking questions. You're going to disappear quietly, transferred to some nice remote boarding school where traumatized veterans can get the help they need. And in exchange, Principal Davies here gets to keep his job and his life. And if I refuse, Then we'll have to get creative. Maybe a tragic suicide. Poor traumatized war veteran couldn't handle the pressure of normal life. Maybe an accident during one of these teenage fights you seem so good at starting. Kira looked at Principal Davies, who was staring at her with desperate eyes. Despite his failures as an administrator, he was an innocent man caught up in something far beyond his understanding. She couldn't let him suffer for her choices, but she also couldn't let these people bury the truth about the war, whatever it was. "I need to know what my mother discovered," she said quietly. Martinez shrugged. "That's not how this works." "Then I guess we have a problem." What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but it changed everything. Kira moved with the deadly precision that 4 years of warfare had burned into her very DNA. The fake janitor's unconscious body became a weapon, thrown with calculated force to take down one of Martinez's guards. A fire extinguisher became a blunt instrument and a smokescreen. The principal's heavy desk became mobile cover. When the smoke cleared, 3 professional security operatives were unconscious. Martinez was zip-tied to a chair with her own restraints, and Principal Davies was free and calling the real police. But as sirens began approaching the school, Kira knew her life had just become infinitely more complicated. Whatever her mother had discovered, it was important enough for powerful people to kill for. And now they knew she wouldn't back down. "You have no idea what you're getting into," Martinez said as police officers entered the office. "Maybe not," Kira replied, "but I'm going to find out." As she gave her statement to the police, Kira realized that her problems at Jefferson High had just become the least of her concerns. The war might be over, but apparently the fighting wasn't. The arrest of Sarah Martinez and her team sent shockwaves through both the school and the wider community. Within hours, news vans were parked outside Jefferson High, and reporters were trying to interview anyone who had ever spoken to Kira. The story of a teenage war veteran stopping a conspiracy in her high school cafeteria was too dramatic for the media to ignore. But the attention brought new problems. Dr. Canister dug. Chen had to install additional security at their apartment complex after suspicious vehicles were spotted watching the building. Kira found herself under protective custody with federal agents escorting her to and from school. The normal teenage life she had been struggling to build seemed further away than ever. The investigation into Martinez's organization revealed connections that reached deep into the political and military establishments. Someone had been working very hard to suppress certain information about the Convergence War, and Kira's mother had apparently stumbled onto something that threatened their plans. "We're still piecing it together," Agent Diana Foster explained during one of many debriefing sessions. She was a federal investigator specializing in war crimes, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and infinite patience. "But it looks like your mother discovered evidence that the Convergence attack wasn't entirely unprovoked." Kira felt the world shift around her. "What do you mean?" "Classified mining operations in disputed space, weapons testing on planets claimed to be uninhabited, corporate interests that may have triggered the Convergence response." Agent Foster's expression was grim. "If your mother's research is accurate, the war that cost millions of lives might have been preventable." The revelation hit Kira like a physical blow. She had spent 4 years fighting aliens she believed were trying to exterminate humanity for no reason beyond alien aggression. She had watched friends die, made impossible choices, carried guilt and trauma that would last her lifetime, all while believing they were defending innocent civilians from unprovoked attack. "You're saying we started it." The Convergence were still the aggressors. Their response was massively disproportionate to any human actions, but there may have been provocations that were covered up to maintain public support for the war effort. Kira stared out the window of the federal building where they were meeting. Below, normal people were going about their normal lives, completely unaware that their understanding of recent history might be built on lies. "Does this change anything?" she asked finally. "About what we did in the war, I mean." "That's not for me to decide," Agent Foster said gently. "But I will say this. You and every other person who served saved countless lives. Whatever mistakes were made at the policy level, the individual courage and sacrifice of people like you and your mother is what prevented a genocide. The investigation continued for weeks, during which Kira's life existed in a strange suspension between her old world and her new one. She still attended classes at Jefferson High, but now under federal protection. The other students didn't know how to react to her anymore. She had gone from social outcast to celebrity to something approaching a living legend. Brad Morrison and his crew had completely backed off, apparently realizing that targeting someone under federal investigation was several levels above their usual bullying expertise. In fact, Brad himself had approached Kira one day with what might have been an apology, though it was so awkward and stilted that she wasn't entirely sure. "Look," he had said, catching her by her locker between classes, "I know I didn't understand. What I'm trying to say is, you're trying to say you're sorry," Kira supplied. "Yeah." That Brad looked profoundly uncomfortable. "My dad, after the thing with the fake lockdown in the news coverage, he explained some things about the war, about what you kids actually went through. I guess I never really thought of it as real before." "It was real," Kira said simply. "I know that now, and I'm sorry. For all of it. The things I said about your mom, especially." He trailed off, apparently lacking words for how cruel he had been. "Apology accepted," Kira said, surprising them both. "But you need to understand, I'm not forgiving you because you're sorry. I'm forgiving you because carrying around anger toward people who don't matter is exhausting, and I have bigger things to worry about." The conversation had been overheard by several other students, and word spread quickly. Kira's pragmatic approach to forgiveness seemed to earn her more respect than any amount of fighting had. Students began to see her not as a dangerous outsider, but as someone who had faced unimaginable challenges with grace and strength. Maya and her art friends had rallied around Kira throughout the investigation, providing emotional support and a sense of normalcy when federal agents weren't debriefing her. The memorial project had evolved into something more ambitious, a multimedia installation that told the story of the Convergence War from multiple perspectives, including those of the child soldiers who had been largely written out of the official histories. "We want people to understand what you went through," Maya explained as they worked late one afternoon in the art room. "Not just the fighting, but the impossible choices, the loss, the way you had to grow up too fast." "Why?" Kira asked. "Most people don't want to think about unpleasant things." "Because pretending ugly things don't exist is how they keep happening," Jake said quietly. He was working on a painting that showed child soldiers in the foreground with adult politicians in shadow behind them. "My mom always said that history belongs to whoever controls the narrative. Maybe it's time for your narrative to be heard." The breakthrough in the investigation came from an unexpected source. While going through her mother's personal effects, which had finally been released by the military, Kira discovered a hidden data storage device concealed inside a medical scanner. Her mother, it turned out, had been even more cautious and clever than anyone had realized. The data contained detailed evidence of illegal mining operations, weapons testing on inhabited worlds that had been reported as empty, and communications between corporate executives and government officials discussing ways to manage the convergence response to maximize military contracts and resource extraction rights. "She documented everything," Agent Foster said, reviewing the files with obvious amazement. "Corporate bribes, falsified survey reports, orders to destroy evidence of indigenous populations on contested worlds. Your mother was building a case that would have brought down half the military-industrial complex." "Is that why she was killed?" "She wasn't killed, Kira. She died holding her post during the bombardment of New Sydney, just like you were told. But if she had survived, she would have been assassinated, yes. We found evidence of at least 3 planned attempts on her life before the bombardment made the point moot. Her mother had died a hero, but she had also died carrying knowledge that could have changed everything. The weight of that legacy was almost overwhelming. What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prosecute everyone we can identify. We release the truth about what really started the war, and we try to make sure something like this never happens again." "And what about me?" Agent Foster smiled for the first time since Kira had met her. That's entirely up to you. You could testify before Congress. You could write a book. You could go to college and become a xenobiologist like your mother. Or you could finish high school and figure it out from there. The choice seemed both infinite and impossible. Kira had spent so long just trying to survive that the idea of actively choosing her future felt foreign. But as she walked back through the halls of Jefferson High that afternoon, surrounded by federal agents who were becoming increasingly unnecessary as the threat level decreased, she began to see possibilities. Students who had once avoided her now nodded respectfully as she passed. Teachers who had viewed her as a problem now saw her as an opportunity to discuss real history with someone who had lived it. Even Principal Davies, recovering from his ordeal but back at work, had approached her about speaking to other schools about her experiences. "You've become a symbol," Maya observed as they worked on the memorial project after school. "People are starting to understand that the war was more complicated than the official story made it seem." "I never wanted to be a symbol," Kira replied. "I just wanted to be normal." "Maybe normal was never really an option for you," Jake suggested. "Maybe the question isn't how to be normal, but how to be extraordinary in a way that helps people." That night, Kira sat in her apartment looking through her mother's research files. Hidden among the political evidence were personal notes, messages that her mother had never intended for official consumption. Letters to the daughter she might not live to see grow up. "My dearest Kira." One entry read, "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I'm gone. I know you're probably angry at me for keeping secrets, angry at the universe for putting you in an impossible situation, angry at adults for failing to protect you from the choices you've had to make. That anger is justified, and I hope you hold on to it because anger at injustice is what drives people to change the world. But I also hope you remember that individual people are not responsible for the failures of systems. The boy who bullies you at school is not the same as the politicians who started this war. Your classmates who don't understand your experiences are not your enemies. They're just people trying to make sense of a world that's bigger and more complicated than they've been prepared for. You have a choice to make, sweetheart. You can let the trauma and the anger define you, or you can use them as fuel to build something better. I can't tell you what that something should be, only you can figure that out. But I believe with all my heart that you have the strength to choose healing over hatred, hope over cynicism, building over destroying. The galaxy is going to be watching you, Kira. You're part of a generation that saved civilization itself. What you do next will help determine what kind of world we build in the aftermath of war. I know it's not fair to put that responsibility on someone so young, but fairness was never really an option for any of us. Whatever you choose, know that your father and I are proud of you, not just for what you've survived, but for who you've remained despite everything you've been through. You are our greatest hope for the future." Kira wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing lives her sacrifice had helped to preserve. Tomorrow she would go back to Jefferson High, continue working on the memorial project, attend classes where teenagers worried about prom dates and college applications. But she would also continue fighting for truth in her own way. Not with plasma rifles and tactical coordinates, but with art and testimony and the simple act of refusing to let people forget what the cost of peace had really been. The war was over, but the real battle, the battle for the kind of future humanity would build, was just beginning. And this time, Kira would fight it on her own terms. 6 months after the conspiracy at Jefferson High was exposed, Kira stood before a packed auditorium at the Galactic Council headquarters on Luna Station. The memorial project that had started in her high school art room had grown into something far larger, a traveling exhibition that told the untold stories of the Convergence War, with particular focus on the child soldiers who had been largely erased from official histories. "My name is Kira Thorne," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I was 14 when I killed my first Convergence hunter. I was 15 when I watched my best friend die in a plasma bombardment. I was 16 when I made decisions that saved thousands of lives and cost thousands more. Today, I'm 18, and I'm here to tell you why those details matter. In the audience sat representatives from dozens of worlds, military officials, politicians, and other war veterans. Many of them had initial reservations about hearing from a teenage girl, but Kira's reputation had preceded her. The girl who had uncovered a conspiracy, exposed war profiteering, and somehow managed to finish high school while testifying before 3 different congressional committees was not someone to be dismissed lightly. For the past 2 years, I've been trying to understand 2 things, Kira continued. First, how a galaxy that depends on children to fight its wars can then turn around and treat those same children as damaged goods when the fighting stops. And second, how we can build a future that's worth the price we paid for it. The presentation that followed was unlike anything the Galactic Council had seen before. Using art, testimony, and carefully documented evidence, Kira and her collaborators told the story of the war from the perspective of those who had fought it. The memorial project had grown to include contributions from hundreds of young veterans, creating a tapestry of experience that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Maya, now studying interstellar communications at New Geneva University, had helped design the multimedia components. Jake, who had won a scholarship to the Mars Institute of Art, had contributed paintings that captured the psychological landscape of child soldiers with devastating accuracy. Even some of Kira's former classmates from Jefferson High had played roles, conducting interviews and helping to archive testimonies. But the heart of the presentation was Kira herself, standing before the most powerful people in known space and refusing to let them look away from uncomfortable truths. "We've learned that the Convergence War was more complex than anyone wanted to admit," she said as images from her mother's research appeared on the screens behind her. Corporate interests, political calculations, and strategic blunders all played roles in escalating what might have been a manageable border dispute into a civilization-threatening conflict. But here's what we've also learned. That complexity doesn't diminish the courage of the people who fought. It doesn't make their sacrifices less meaningful. It just means we have a responsibility to learn from their experiences and do better next time. The most powerful moment came when Kira displayed a photo taken during the Battle of Kepler 442b. It showed a group of young soldiers, including herself at age 16, standing among the ruins of a convergence staging area. Their faces were hard with premature age. Their eyes too old for their years, but they were smiling. In the background, civilian transport ships were evacuating the planet's population. This picture was taken 3 hours after we broke the siege of Kepler Colony, Kira explained. We had been fighting for 18 straight hours. 7 of the kids in this photo would be dead within a week, but they're smiling because behind them, 40,000 civilians were getting away safely. She paused, letting the image speak for itself. That's what I want you to remember when you make decisions about war and peace. Not the political calculations or the economic interests or the strategic advantages. Remember the faces of the people who actually do the fighting and the faces of the people they're fighting to protect. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 10 minutes, but more importantly, the presentation led to concrete changes. The Galactic Veterans Affairs Agency was restructured to better serve young veterans. New protocols were established for civilian protection during conflicts. Most significantly, the Child Soldier Prevention Act was passed, establishing 18 as the absolute minimum age for military service across all human space. After the presentation, Kira found herself in the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars through massive transparent aluminum windows. Earth hung in the distance, blue and peaceful, while ships from a dozen different worlds moved through the traffic patterns around Luna Station. "Quite a view," said a familiar voice behind her. Kira turned to find Admiral Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen despite the name, approaching. He was one of the few senior officers who had supported the investigation into the war's origins despite pressure from his peers to let sleeping secrets lie. "It helps put things in perspective," she agreed. "I wanted to thank you," the Admiral said. "What you did today, what you've been doing for the past year, it took courage. A different kind of courage than what you showed in the war, but courage nonetheless." "I just told the truth. That's exactly what made it courageous." Admiral Chen joined her at the window. "Truth is dangerous to people who profit from lies. You could have taken the easy path, kept quiet, accepted the official story, lived on your veterans' benefits, and tried to forget. Forgetting was never really an option, Kira said. The memories don't go away just because they're inconvenient. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Finally, Admiral Chen spoke again. Have you decided what you want to do next? I know several universities would be honored to have you. The military would welcome you back if that's what you chose. Kira had been wrestling with that question for months. She had options now that she had never imagined as a traumatized 17-year-old trying to fit in at Jefferson High. Prestigious universities were offering full scholarships. Military academies wanted her to train the next generation of officers. Publishers wanted her to write memoirs. Political parties wanted her to run for office. I think I want to teach, she said finally, not at a military academy, but at a regular school. I want to help prepare the next generation to face an uncertain galaxy without having to become child soldiers to do it. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. The galaxy could use more teachers who understand the real cost of their failures. As the Admiral left, Kira remained at the window thinking about the long journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she had been a traumatized war veteran who couldn't figure out how to order lunch in a high school cafeteria. She had been bullied, misunderstood, and nearly killed by people who wanted to keep inconvenient truths buried. But she had also discovered something that 4 years of warfare hadn't taught her. That healing was possible, that growth could come from trauma, and that individual people could make a difference even in a galaxy-spanning civilization. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maya. Saw the broadcast. You were amazing. Coffee when you get back to Earth? Another message from Jake. My latest painting is based on your speech. Can't wait to show you. And one from Dr. Chen. Proud of you, kiddo. Your mom would be too. Even a message from Brad Morrison, of all people. Watched your presentation in my political science class. Professor said it was the most important speech he'd heard in 20 years. Thanks for not giving up on us. Kira smiled as she read the messages. She had found her tribe, not in the military units where she had fought for survival, but in the relationships she had built while learning to be human again. Artists and teachers, former bullies and federal agents, all connected by the shared recognition that the future was something you had to fight for, one relationship at a time. The return journey to Earth took 2 days, giving Kira time to think about her next steps. She had been accepted to the University of New Geneva with a full scholarship, planning to study education and xenopsychology. The same university where her mother had done her groundbreaking research on convergence biology, but she had also been offered a position at Jefferson High teaching a new course called Contemporary Galactic History, essentially helping high school students understand the complex realities of the world they were inheriting. The irony wasn't lost on her that she might end up back at the same school where she had been suspended for fighting. The decision crystallized as she watched Earth grow larger in the ship's view screen. She would take the teaching position. University could wait a few years. Right now, there were kids like her, not war veterans necessarily, but outsiders, misfits, young people struggling to find their place in a world that seemed designed to exclude them, who needed to know that their struggles mattered. Her first day at Jefferson High as a teacher felt surreal. The building looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. The student body was more diverse now, including young refugees from worlds that had been devastated in the war. The curriculum had been updated to include realistic discussions of galactic politics, and in the main hallway hung a permanent installation based on the memorial project Kira had started in the art room. Ms. Thorne, a nervous-looking 16-year-old, approached her after her first class. I'm Alex Martinez. My mom said I should talk to you. Kira recognized the name. Sarah Martinez had been released from prison after cooperating with the investigation and was now working to expose other corruption in the military-industrial complex. Her daughter was apparently dealing with the social fallout from having a mother who had been involved in war profiteering. What can I do for you, Alex? Everyone at school knows who my mom is. What she did, they look at me like I'm responsible for her choices. The girl's voice was small, but there was strength underneath. I heard you say once that individual people aren't responsible for the failures of systems. How do you live with that when everyone thinks you are responsible? Kira studied the girl's face, seeing something of her own struggle reflected there. Different circumstances, different specific trauma, but the same fundamental challenge: how to build an identity separate from the worst things in your life. "Can I tell you something that took me a long time to learn?" Kira asked gently. Alex nodded. "You get to decide who you are. Not your mother's choices, not other people's opinions, not the worst day of your life. You get to decide." Kira gestured toward the memorial installation in the hallway. Every person represented in that memorial made that choice at some point. They decided that their trauma wouldn't be the end of their story. What if I don't know how to make that choice? Then you start small. You choose to be kind when it would be easier to be cruel. You choose to tell the truth when it would be safer to lie. You choose to help someone when you could just walk away. Eventually, all those small choices add up to a person you can be proud of. As Alex walked away looking slightly less burdened, Kira felt a familiar sense of purpose settling in her chest. This was what she was meant to do, not fighting aliens or exposing conspiracies, but helping young people navigate the complexities of growing up in a galaxy that was often cruel and always complicated. The afternoon brought her former tormentor Brad Morrison, now a college freshman, home on break. He knocked hesitantly on her classroom door during her free period. "Miss Thorne, I hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For teaching me that being wrong doesn't have to be the end of the world, for showing me that strong people don't punch down." Brad looked genuinely different, less arrogant, more thoughtful. "I'm studying political science now, planning to run for office someday. I want to be the kind of leader who listens to uncomfortable truths instead of silencing them." "That's a good goal," Kira said simply. "I keep thinking about what you said to me in the hallway that day, about my mom dying so kids like me could be safe enough to be stupid. I was being stupid, but you still saw something worth protecting in me. Everyone deserves a chance to grow beyond their worst moments." As Brad left, Kira reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 2 years ago, she had been ready to fight him in a school hallway. Now she was watching him grow into someone who might actually make the galaxy a little better. Her phone rang. Dr. Chen checking in as she did every few days. "How's the first day going?" "Good," Kira said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. "Different than I expected, but good." "Any regrets about not going straight to university?" Kira looked around her classroom with its windows facing out toward the same parking lot where she had stood 2 years ago, terrified and alone. On her desk were lesson plans designed to help teenagers understand the complex realities of interstellar politics. On her walls were letters from students at other schools where the memorial exhibition was currently showing. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." That evening, Kira drove past the Veterans Memorial where she had first met Marcus Webb. The old Marine was there again, as he was most evenings, sitting quietly by the wall of names. She pulled over and walked over to him. "How's the teaching going?" he asked without turning around. "You knew?" "Kid, your first day at Jefferson High made the interstellar news. She lived through war, then faced bullying at school. Best HFY fiction. HFY Sci-Fi.